In the hushed hours between dusk and dawn, when the modern world finally quiets its relentless hum, there exists a doorway to another time, a time when silence itself was considered sacred, and the simple act of sharing tea could transform warriors into poets of stillness. Tonight, we journey together into the forgotten corners of medieval Japan, where samurai warriors, those legendary figures we know for their fierce battles and unwavering honor, discovered something far more profound than victory on any battlefield. They found peace in the most unlikely of places, humble tea houses that dotted the landscape like quiet sanctuaries, offering refuge not just from physical storms, but from the tempests of the human heart. Picture, if you will, the Japan of centuries past, not the Japan of Hollywood epics with their clashing swords and thunderous war cries, but the Japan that existed in the spaces between conflicts. This was a land where cherry blossoms fell like whispered prayers onto moss-covered stones, where the gentle creak of bamboo and evening breezes marked the passage of time more reliably than any temple bell. In this world, even the mightiest samurai understood that true strength sometimes meant knowing when to set down one's sword, to bow low beneath a tea house doorway, and to find courage in vulnerability. These were not moments of weakness, but of profound wisdom, recognition that the human spirit, no matter how disciplined in the arts of war, still yearned for something deeper than conquest. The tea houses we'll explore tonight were not grand structures of political power or religious authority. They were small, humble spaces, often no larger than a few tatami mats, where the rigid hierarchies of feudal society dissolved like morning mist. Here, in these quiet chambers, a battle-hardened warrior might sit beside a traveling merchant, a learned monk, or a simple farmer, all equal in their shared appreciation for the gentle ritual of tea. As we begin this journey together, allow your breathing to slow, your shoulders to soften, and your mind to release the urgencies of today. We are traveling not just through space, but through time itself. Following paths worn smooth by centuries of seekers who understood that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to be still. The flickering candlelight of these ancient tea houses still burns in memory, casting long shadows that reach across the centuries to touch us here, now in this moment. And in that light, we too can find the same peace that once soothed the spirits of samurai warriors. Discovering that the greatest battles are often won not through force, but through the simple, profound act of letting go. Let us step together through the garden gate, leaving behind the noise and haste of our time, and enter a world where time itself moved to the rhythm of slowly steeping tea, where every gesture was a prayer, and where even the mightiest warriors learned that true power lies in perfect stillness. Beyond the threshold of the tea house, medieval Japan unfolded like a scroll painted in watercolors of muted greens and browns. A landscape where life moved to rhythms dictated not by clocks, but by the sun's patient arc across the sky and the changing songs of seasonal birds. In this world of the 12th to 16th centuries, most of Japan's people lived in small villages scattered across valleys and mountainsides, like seeds cast by a gentle hand. These communities existed in a harmony born of necessity, where every person's work was woven into the larger tapestry of survival and prosperity. Rice paddies stretched in perfect terraces up hillsides, their surfaces reflecting the sky like mirrors, tended by farmers whose movements had been refined across generations into something approaching dance. The rhythm of agricultural life provided the heartbeat for all of society. In spring, when the mountain snows melted into rushing streams, families would gather for the ritual planting of rice seedlings, their voices lifted in work songs that had been passed down through centuries. The sound of these songs floating across the flooded fields in the morning mist created a soundtrack of community that even the busiest samurai would pause to appreciate during their travels. Villages were connected by narrow paths that wound through bamboo groves and forest clearings, paths that had been worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. These routes were marked not by road signs, but by small shrines and stone markers, each one a reminder that travel itself was a form of pilgrimage. every journey an opportunity for reflection and discovery. Along these paths, one might encounter traveling merchants whose pack animals carried goods that connected distant regions, silk from mountain villages, pottery from famous kilns, tea leaves that had been handpicked on remote hillsides. These traders were libraries of stories, carrying news and gossip from village to village. Their presence at the local and marking occasions for communal gathering and gentle celebration. The towns that did exist were modest affairs, rarely more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a market square or temple grounds. Even in these larger settlements, the pace of life remained unhurried. Craftsmen worked in shops that opened directly onto the street, their tools creating rhythmic sounds, the tap of hammers on metal, the whisper of planes across wood, the gentle splash of dyes in ceramic vats that blended into an urban symphony of measured, purposeful activity. In the castle towns where samurai made their homes, stone walls rose like man-made mountains. Yet even these fortifications seemed to grow organically from the landscape. The architecture followed principles of harmony with nature that made even military structures feel integrated with their surroundings. Gardens within these compounds weren't afterthoughts, but essential elements that brought the outside world inside, creating spaces where warriors could contemplate the changing seasons, even while preparing for battles that might never come. The contrast between this everyday world and the interior of a tea house was profound yet subtle. While villages and towns hummed with the gentle business of daily life, the tea house existed as a pocket of even deeper quiet, a place where the already measured pace of medieval Japanese life slowed to something approaching meditation. This was particularly meaningful for the samurai class, whose lives were divided between long periods of relative peace and sudden moments of intense action. In the centuries between the major conflicts that shaped Japanese history, many warriors found themselves with time to contemplate, to study, and to seek meaning beyond the battlefield. The tea house provided a sanctuary where these refined warriors could practice a different kind of discipline, a discipline of presence, of attention to small details, finding profound meaning in simple actions. Even the journey to reach such a tea house was part of its magic. One might travel for hours along forest paths where the only sounds were footsteps on fallen leaves and the distant call of birds. The gradual transition from the everyday world to the sacred space of the tea house began long before one reached the actual building, starting with the first steps away from the familiar rhythms of community life as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in ever-deepening shades of gold and purple. Travelers would glimpse their destination through the triza, small structure with warm light glowing through paper walls. Smoke rising from its chimney-like incense offered to the twilight sky. In that moment, the contrast became complete. The vast, living world of medieval Japan settling into evening quiet and ahead, a tiny sanctuary where silence itself would become the most honored guest. The gentle transition from day to evening, from the public world to the private sanctuary, from the rhythms of community to the deeper rhythm of solitary reflection, prepared visitors for an experience that would transform not just their evening, but their understanding of what it meant to truly rest in a world that, even in its quieter pace, still demanded so much from the human heart. The approach to a samurai tea house was never a simple matter of walking from point A to point B. It was a carefully orchestrated transition from the everyday world into a realm where different rules applied, where time moved differently, where the very act of walking became a form of meditation, long before the tea house itself came into view. Visitors would encounter the first marker of their journey, a simple wooden gate, often so humble it might easily be overlooked by those who weren't seeking it. This gate, known as the outer boundary of the tea garden or roji, stood like a quiet invitation rather than a barrier. Its construction was deliberately rustic, made from unpainted wood that had weathered to a soft gray, its posts slightly irregular, its crossbeams showing the natural grain of the forest from which they came. Passing through this gate required a conscious choice, a mental shift from the mindset of travel to the mindset of pilgrimage. The path beyond meandered, rather than proceeding directly. winding through carefully tended gardens that seemed to have grown naturally, but were, in fact, the result of generations of subtle intervention by tea masters who understood that the journey inward should mirror the landscape of contemplation itself. The pathway was composed of irregular stepping stones called tobiishi, each one placed with precision that appeared accidental. These stones, smooth from years of footsteps, required visitors to slow their pace and pay attention to each step. There was wisdom in this. The hurried stride of daily life became impossible on such a path, and the mind, following the body, began to settle into a different rhythm. Between the stones, moss grew in patches of velvet green, sometimes dotted with tiny wildflowers that changed with the seasons. In spring, violets might nestle between the rocks. In autumn, the pathway would be scattered with leaves and shades of gold and crimson that seemed to glow, even in the fading daylight. The irregular spacing of the stones meant that visitors had to look down to pay attention, to become present in their bodies in a way that the smooth paths of everyday life rarely demanded. Along the way, small stone lanterns marked the progression deeper into the tea garden. These lanterns, called TR, were not grand constructions, but humble structures. Often covered with moss or lichen, their surfaces weathered by rain and wind. During evening tea gatherings, these lanterns would be lit with candles or oil flames, creating pools of warm light that seemed to float in the gathering darkness like fireflies that had chosen to rest. The path wound past carefully placed elements that seemed natural but were actually chosen for their ability to encourage contemplation. A single twisted pine might cast intricate shadows across the walkway. A small stream might cross the path via a simple stone bridge, its gentle murmur adding to the symphony of transition from outer world to inner sanctuary. Bamboo fences, constructed from sections of bamboo bound with natural rope, created gentle boundaries that guided the eye without blocking the view entirely. These fences, like everything else in the tea garden, showed their age gracefully, their golden brown surfaces marked by weather but maintaining their integrity. Their slight irregularities adding to, rather than detracting from their beauty. As visitors proceeded deeper into the garden, they would encounter the mishaya, simple waiting shelter where guests could pause before the final approach to the tea house. This shelter, open on one or more sides, provided a place to sit and further slow the transition from the outside world. Here, guests might wait for others to arrive, or simply take a moment to appreciate the subtle beauty of their surroundings and prepare mentally for the ceremony ahead. The final approach to the tea house required passing through one more boundary, a smaller gate or opening that marked the transition from the outer tea garden to the inner sanctuary. This passage was deliberately humble, often requiring visitors to duck slightly or step carefully over a raised threshold. Physical actions that encouraged the mental act of humility necessary for the tea ceremony. Just before reaching the tea house proper, visitors would encounter the sukubai, stone water basin, where they would ritually wash their hands and rinse their mouths. This wasn't merely a hygienic practice, but a symbolic cleansing, a washing away of the dust and concerns of the outer world. The water, often supplied by a simple bamboo pipe that trickled a constant gentle stream, was cool and clear, sound adding to the growing sense of purification and preparation. The dipper used for this cleansing was made of bamboo, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, its weight and balance perfect for its purpose. The act of lifting water, pouring it over one's hands, then touching the cool liquid to one's lips became a moment of mindfulness, a pause that marked the final transition from the role of traveler to the role of tea guest. By the time visitors raised their eyes to see the tea house itself, they had been walking for perhaps only a few minutes, but they had traveled much further than the physical distance might suggest. Their breathing had slowed, their attention had focused, and their minds had begun to release the preoccupations that had occupied them on their journey to this place. The tea house waited ahead, small and humble, its paper-covered windows glowing softly with the light within, its roof showing the gentle sag of age and weather, its entire presence an invitation to enter and discover what lay beyond the the threshold of this carefully crafted transition from the world of doing to the world of being, the tea house. That awaited at the end of the winding path was a structure that seemed to apologize for its own existence. So thoroughly had its architects embraced the principle that true elegance lies in restraint. That power reveals itself most fully through humility. From the outside, the building appeared almost accidental, as if it had grown from the earth rather than been constructed by human hands. Its walls, made of wood and clay plaster, had weathered to colors that echoed the surrounding forest's soft browns, muted grays, and the warm gold of aged cedar. The roof, thatched with reeds or topped with weathered wooden shingles, curved gently downward, its eaves extending far enough to create deep shadows that seemed to embrace the structure in permanent twilight. The most striking aspect of the tea house was perhaps what it lacked rather than what it possessed. There were no grand entrances, no imposing facades, no decorative elements designed to impress or intimidate. Instead, the building seemed to whisper rather than shout, to invite rather than command attention. The entrance to the tea house was deliberately smaller opening called the Nijiriguchi, barely more than 2 feet square, that required even the smallest adult to crouch and crawl to enter. This wasn't a design flaw, but a carefully considered element that served multiple purposes. The physical act of bending low to enter encouraged humility, regardless of one's social status outside these walls. A daimyo lord and a humble merchant had to assume the same posture to cross this threshold, their temporary vulnerability creating an immediate equality that would continue throughout their time in the tea house. For samurai, this entrance held particular significance. Their swords, the symbols of their status and power, could not be worn through such a small opening. Instead, these weapons had to be left outside, placed on special wooden racks, or simply laid aside, transforming warriors into simple guests, seeking nothing more than the warmth of shared tea and quiet conversation. Inside, the tea house revealed the full genius of its humble architecture. The space was tiny, traditionally just 4.5 talmi in area, roughly 9 feet square, forcing intimacy upon its occupants, while simultaneously creating a sense of infinite spaciousness. Through the careful manipulation of proportion and perspective, the tatami mats that covered the floor were woven from rush grass and filled with rice straw. Their surface is soft enough to sit upon comfortably, yet firm enough to provide support. Each mat was precisely the same size as every other, creating a modular system that had been perfected over centuries. The subtle geometric patterns created by the arrangement of these mats provided visual interest without distraction, their edges bound with cloth in colors that complemented the overall harmony of the space. The ceiling of the tea house was deliberately low, rarely more than 6 feet high, creating an intimate scale that encouraged quiet conversation and inward focus. The beams and supports were left visible, their natural wood grain and joinery becoming decorative elements that celebrated the craft of construction while maintaining the overall aesthetic of humble functionality. Lighting came through shoji screens, wooden frames covered with translucent paper that filtered natural light into a soft, even glow. These screens could be adjusted to control the amount of light entering the space, allowing the tea master to create the perfect atmosphere for each gathering. As daylight faded, candles or oil lamps would provide illumination, their flickering flames creating a warm, intimate atmosphere that seemed to draw conversations inward, toward more contemplative topics. The walls themselves were studies in restraint. Made of clay plaster over wooden frames, they were left in natural colors, whites, pale grays, and warm earth tones that provided a neutral backdrop for the ceremony that would unfold within these walls. There were no paintings, no decorative objects, no elements designed to distract attention from the primary purpose of the space, the shared experience of tea. However, this apparent simplicity masked sophisticated design principles. The proportions of the room followed mathematical relationships that created a sense of harmony, even when not consciously perceived. The placement of windows, the height of the ceiling, The position of the hearth, every element had been considered and refined over generations to create a space that felt both intimate and expansive, both humble and profound. The hearth, sunken into the floor and lined with stone or ceramic, served as both the practical center of tea preparation and the spiritual heart of the gathering. Around this small fire, guests would arrange themselves in a circle, the flickering flames creating a primal sense of community that connected them to countless generations who had gathered around fires for warmth, food, and fellowship. Storage was built into the structure itself. Small recesses in the walls where tea implements could be kept. Subtle shelves that seemed to be natural extensions of the building's frame rather than additions to it. Every element had its place. Every place had been designed to serve multiple functions while maintaining the overall aesthetic of elegant simplicity. The genius of tea house architecture lay in its ability to transform limitation into liberation, by constraining the physical space to the absolute minimum necessary for function. The architects had created a structure that seemed to expand rather than confine the human spirit. In these small, humble rooms, conversations could range across vast territories of philosophy and feeling. Friendships could deepen in ways that grand palaces rarely allowed, and individual souls could find the spaciousness that comes only when external distractions are eliminated. As guests settled onto the tatami mats and their eyes adjusted to the gentle light filtering through the shoji screens, they entered not just a building, but a state of mind, one where the greatest luxury was simplicity, where the finest decoration was the absence of decoration, and where true comfort came not from physical ease, but from the profound peace that emerges when human beings gather in spaces designed to honor rather than impress, to shelter rather than intimidate, to create opportunities for connection rather than display. In the soft glow of the tea house lanterns, something extraordinary happened to even the most battle-hardened samurai. They became human again. Not in the sense of gaining humanity they had lost, but in rediscovering parts of themselves that the demands of warrior life had necessarily set aside. The transformation began even before entering the tea house proper, in the ritual removal of the symbols that define their external identity. The katana and wakizashi, those legendary paired swords that marked a samurai's status as surely as a crown marked royalty, were placed with ceremonial care on wooden sword racks, positioned just outside the tea house entrance. This wasn't merely a practical necessity imposed by the small Nijiraguchi entrance, but a conscious act of symbolic disarmament, a voluntary setting aside of the tools and mindset of conflict in favor of something more fundamental. Watching a samurai remove his swords was like watching a tree shed its leaves in autumn, natural, necessary, and somehow beautiful in its deliberate vulnerability. The wakizashi, the shorter companion sword that samurai wore, even when not in full battle dress, was often the last to be removed, its absence creating a moment of nakedness that went far beyond the physical. Without these blades, which had been constant companions through years of service and potential conflict, even the most confident warrior experienced a moment of adjustment, a subtle shift in posture and presence that marked the beginning of their journey inward. The removal of armor, when worn, was an even more dramatic transformation. The elaborate lacings that held together the plates of a samurai's armor had to be loosened with patience and care, each cord representing not just physical protection, but psychological preparation for battle. As these bindings were untied, as the weight of metal and leather was lifted from shoulders and chest, the warrior's body seemed to expand, to breathe more deeply, to remember what it felt like to move without the constant awareness of potential threat. But it was in the shedding of mental armor that the most profound transformation occurred. The hypervigilance that kept a samurai alive on the battlefield, the constant scanning for threats, the readiness to react to sudden movement or sound, the mental preparation for violence, all of this had to be consciously set aside before crossing the threshold of the tea house. This internal disarmament was perhaps more challenging than the physical act of removing weapons, requiring a kind of courage that was different from, but no less demanding than, battlefield bravery. Inside the tea house, seated on tatami mats, with legs folded in the seiza position, samurai found themselves in an environment that demanded an entirely different kind of discipline. where battlefield discipline required explosive action and split-second decision-making, tea house discipline required patience, attention to subtle detail, and the ability to find meaning in the smallest gestures. The skills were related but distinct. Both required complete presence of mind, but one focused outward toward threats and opportunities, while the other focused inward toward understanding and connection. The physical posture required for the tea ceremony was itself a form of meditation for the warrior's body. Kneeling in seza, with the back straight and hands resting gently on the thighs, demanded a different kind of strength than wielding a sword or drawing a bow. This was the strength of stillness, the discipline of maintaining perfect posture, not for minutes or hours, but for as long as the ceremony required, finding comfort in discomfort, grace in constraint. For many samurai, the tea house provided their first opportunity in months or years to experience silence without threat. On the battlefield or in military camps, silence could mean danger and ambush, a surprise attack. The deadly quiet that preceded violence. But in the tea house, silence was benevolent. Filled with the gentle sounds of preparation, the whisper of silk kimonos against tatami mats, the soft scrape of wooden implements against ceramic bowls, the quiet breathing of fellow guests settling into contemplation, this benevolent silence allowed samurai to access parts of themselves that warrior training had taught them to suppress or set aside. Emotions could be acknowledged rather than conquered. Aesthetic appreciation could be cultivated rather than dismissed as impractical. Relationships could be built on shared appreciation for beauty, rather than mutual respect for martial prowess. Many samurai were also poets, calligraphers, and students of philosophy. But the demands of military life often left little time for these pursuits. The tea house provided a sanctuary where these other aspects of their personalities could emerge and be honored. A warrior who spent his days training with weapons might spend his tea house hours discussing the subtle meanings of a poem, the particular beauty of a ceramic bowl, or the philosophical implications of the changing seasons. The contrast between their two worlds, the world of potential violence and the world of certain peace, created a kind of internal tension that many samurai found both challenging and deeply meaningful. They were the same people in both contexts, yet they were also fundamentally different, accessing different skills, different priorities, different ways of being present in the world. In the flickering candlelight of evening tea gatherings, it was not uncommon to see tears in the eyes of hardened warriors, not tears of sadness or defeat, but tears of relief and recognition. Relief at being able to set down the burden of constant readiness, recognition of beauty, connection, and meaning that the demands of duty had temporarily obscured but never destroyed these men. Trained from childhood to face death without flinching, often found that the tea house challenged them in ways that battle never had. It required them to be present without purpose, to act without achieving, to find strength in surrender rather than conquest. The discipline required was no less demanding than martial discipline, but it served entirely different ends. Not the protection of life and honor, but the enrichment of both. As the evening deepened and the tea ceremony unfolded in its measured cadences, samurai discovered that they could be warriors and philosophers, protectors and poets, strong and vulnerable, all within the same hearts that had learned to beat steadily in the face of mortal danger. The tea house didn't diminish their warrior nature. It completed it, providing a space where the human being within the warrior could also find expression, rest and renewal in the hushed sanctuary of the tea house. Time moved to rhythms older than memory, governed not by the urgent demands of daily life, but by the gentle precision of movements that's been refined across centuries into something approaching prayer made visible. The ceremony known as Chano-yu, or the way of tea, unfolded like a meditation in motion. Each gesture deliberate and meaningful, every action connected to the next in an unbroken chain of purpose and beauty. To witness a tea master at work was to see grace incarnate, as if the laws of physics themselves had been softened by devotion, allowing movements to flow with a quality that seemed to exist outside ordinary time. The preparation began long before guests arrived. In the careful selection and arrangement of implements, each chosen not merely for its function, but for its ability to contribute to the overall harmony of the gathering. The tea master would consider the season, the weather, the particular guests who would attend, even the quality of light that would filter through the shoji screens, allowing all these factors to guide decisions about which tea bowl to use, which ladle to select, which particular grade of powdered tea would best serve the moment. When the ceremony began, it started with the ritual cleaning of implements that were already perfectly clean, a practice that transformed practical preparation into spiritual purification. The tea master would take up each tool in turn, wiping it with a silk cloth in prescribed patterns, the movements so slow and deliberate the guests could follow every nuance, every subtle shift of hand position, every change in pressure as cloth met ceramic or wood. The water for tea was heated in an iron kettle suspended over charcoal that had been arranged with the same care a sculptor might give to marble. The placement of each piece of charcoal affected not only the heat distribution, but the subtle sounds the fire would,
like the gentle crackling that would provide a backdrop to conversation.
The occasional settling of burning wood that punctuated silence with perfect timing. Even the selection of charcoal was an art, with different woods chosen for their burning characteristics, their ash patterns, and the particular quality of heat they would provide. The act of adding water to the tea powdered green tea called machos performed, with a bamboo ladle that had been carved and shaped until it achieved perfect balance in the hand. The tea master would lift water from the kettle with movements so smooth they seemed to be happening in slow motion, pouring the hot liquid onto the bright green powder in measured amounts, the steam rising like incense to mingle with the warm air of the tea house. The whisking of the tea was perhaps the most mesmerizing aspect of the entire ceremony. Using a bamboo whisk called a chasen, carved from a single piece of bamboo and split into dozens of fine tines, the tea master would whip the tea and water together in patterns that had been prescribed by generations of masters. The whisk moved in precise figures, sometimes in the shape of the character for 10, sometimes in fluid circles, sometimes in sharp zigzags that gradually softened into gentle spirals. The sound of whisking was unique and unmistakably soft shushing that seemed to embody the very essence of the tea-making process. This sound, combined with the visual beauty of the bright green foam that gradually developed on the surface of the tea, created a sensory experience that engaged multiple levels of awareness simultaneously. Guests found themselves following not just the visual choreography of the tea master's movements, but the auditory rhythms that accompanied each phase of preparation. The presentation of the finished tea involved another layer of ritualized movement. The tea bowl, now filled with perfectly whisked matcha, was turned in the tea master's hands so that its most beautiful aspect, perhaps subtle glaze pattern or a particularly pleasing irregularity in shape, faced the guest who would receive it. This turning was done with reverence, as if the bowl were a living thing whose preferences and dignity deserved consideration. The guest receiving the tea participated in the ceremony through their own prescribed movements. The bowl was accepted with both hands, lifted slightly in a gesture of gratitude, then turned so that the front of the bowl faced away before drinking. These movements, like all aspects of the tea ceremony, served multiple purposes: practical considerations like ensuring everyone could drink from a clean portion of the rim, combined with aesthetic principles that honored the beauty of the implement and the skill of its maker. The drinking itself became part of the choreography. The tea was consumed in 3 sips, each with its own significance. The first to appreciate the temperature and initial flavor. The second to experience the full taste and texture. The third to empty the bowl and prepare for its return to the host. The final sip was accompanied by a subtle slurping sound that, far from being considered rude, was actually a sign of appreciation that allowed the drinker to fully experience the tea's aroma and flavor between each phase of the ceremony. Moments of stillness provided space for contemplation and appreciation. These pauses were not empty time but full silence, pregnant with attention and awareness. Guests used these moments to appreciate the sounds of the tea house, the gentle bubbling of water in the kettle, the soft rustling of silk kimonos, the distant call of evening birds in the garden outside. The cleanup and closing of the ceremony followed. The same principles of deliberate beauty that governed its opening. Each implement was cleaned, dried, put away with the same attention that had marked its use. The tea master's movements maintaining their grace and precision even in these concluding actions. The fire was allowed to die down naturally, the kettle removed from the heat. The tea implements arranged for storage in patterns that honored their service while preparing them for rest, as guests prepared to leave. They moved with the same measured pace that had characterized the entire gathering, their departure as ritualized as their arrival. The tea ceremony didn't end abruptly, but dissolved gradually, like mist touched by morning sun, leaving participants with a sense of completion that extended far beyond the simple satisfaction of having consumed a cup of tea in the profound quiet of the tea house. Silence revealed itself not as the absence of sound, but as a canvas upon which the most subtle and meaningful sounds could paint their gentle compositions. Sounds so soft, they might easily be missed in the ordinary world, but which in this sanctuary became as significant as symphony movements, each contributing its own note to the larger harmony of peace. The soundscape of the tea house began with the building itself, with the gentle settling and breathing of wood that had been carefully seasoned and joined by master craftsmen generations earlier. These timbers, now weathered by decades of seasonal expansion and contraction, spoke in whispers, tiny creaks and sighs that marked the passage of time, and the subtle shifts in temperature and humidity that occurred. Throughout each tea gathering, the tatami mats beneath added their own quiet voice to this architectural symphony. Made from woven rush grass filled with rice straw, they compressed slightly under each footstep, creating a soft whooshing sound that was almost felt rather than heard. When guests shifted position during the ceremony, when they rose from or settled into sessa posture, the tatami responded with gentle whispers that seemed to cushion not only their bodies, but the very sounds of their movements. The sliding of shoshi screens provided another layer of gentle acoustics. These paper-covered wooden frames moved in their tracks with a soft whisper that spoke of careful maintenance and perfect craftsmanship. When adjusted to control light or ventilation, they created a sound like wind through tall grass. So subtle it barely registered consciously, but so distinctive that regular visitors to tea houses could identify the particular quality of different screens. The way musicians might distinguish between instruments in an orchestra, the tea preparation itself became a careful orchestration of meaningful sounds. The iron kettle hanging over the charcoal fire produced a range of gentle music as water heated first, the almost inaudible expansion of metal, it warming in the fire's heat. Then the tiny sounds of air bubbles forming and releasing in the heating water, building gradually to the soft, rhythmic murmur that tea masters called the wind in the pines. The sound that indicated water had reached the perfect temperature for making tea. Handling of tea implements created its own subtle percussion section. The wooden ladle lifting water from the kettle made a soft splash as it broke the surface, followed by the gentle trickle as hot water was poured onto the powdered tea in the ceramic bowl. The bamboo whisk against the sides of the tea bowl produced a rhythmic shushing like silk brushing against silk. That varied in pitch and intensity as the tea master worked to create the perfect foam and consistency. Even the silk kimonos worn by participants contributed to the soundscape. The finest silk made no sound at all when moving, but the subtle rustle of sleeves and skirts as guests adjusted their posture or reached for implements created a whispered accompaniment to the visual beauty of the ceremony. These sounds, so soft they existed at the very threshold of hearing, nonetheless added to the overall sense of refinement and attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the tea gathering. The natural world outside the tea house provided a constantly changing backdrop of seasonal sounds that filtered through the paper walls and wooden shutters. In spring, the drip of melting snow from the eaves might mark the rhythm of the ceremony, each drop falling with perfect timing onto the moss-covered stones below. The evening songs of birds returning to roost created a gentle chorus that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythms of tea preparation. As if nature itself were participating in the ceremony, rain held special significance in the soundscape of the tea house. The gentle percussion of raindrops on the thatched or shingled roof created a natural white noise that seemed to further insulate the interior space from the outside world. The sound of rain running through bamboo gutters dripping from eaves and pooling in stone basins became part of the ceremony itself, with tea masters often timing their movements to complement rather than compete with these natural rhythms. During winter gatherings, the subtle sounds of snow settling on the roof or sliding from overloaded branches added their own quiet commentary to the proceedings. The way snow muffled all outdoor sounds created an even deeper sense of intimacy and enclosure, as if the tea house had become a warm, bright jewel suspended in a white, silent world. The breathing of participants, though rarely consciously noticed, provided perhaps the most fundamental rhythm to the tea house soundscape. As guests settled into the meditative pace of the ceremony, their breathing naturally synchronized, creating a gentle, shared rhythm that connected all present in the most basic and intimate way. This collective breathing, soft and regular, became the metronome by which all other sounds were measured and appreciated. Between the prescribed activities of the ceremony, moments of complete silence would settle over the gathering like a gentle blessing. These silences were not empty or uncomfortable, but full and rich, allowing participants to fully appreciate the subtle sounds that surrounded them, the distant murmur of water in the kettle, the almost inaudible sound of candle flames flickering in still air, the tiny settling sounds of cooling charcoal in the brazier. In these profound silences, individual sounds took on almost miraculous clarity and significance. The soft scrape of a wooden spoon against a ceramic container became as meaningful as a bell toll. The gentle sound of fabric against tatami, as someone adjusted their position, became as noteworthy as a musical phrase. The quiet exhalation of a guest lost in contemplation became as significant as a prayer offered to the evening air. As night deepened around the tea house and the ceremony moved toward its natural conclusion, the soundscape gradually simplified, returning to the fundamental rhythms of building, breathing, and the gentle presence of nature just beyond the paper walls. These sounds would continue long after the guests departed, long after the candles were extinguished and the fire allowed to die to glowing coals, creating a continuous lullaby that connected each tea gathering to all those that had come before and all those yet to come within the curved walls of each humble tea bowl lay not merely warm, liquid and powdered leaves, but an entire worldview that had been distilled through centuries of contemplation into principles so profound they could transform. The simple act of sharing tea into a gateway to enlightenment, a philosophy that infused every aspect of the tea ceremony drew its deepest roots from Zen Buddhism. But like water finding its own level, these teachings had flowed into the cultural landscape of Japan and emerged as something uniquely suited to the Japanese aesthetic sensibility and spiritual temperament. In the tea house, abstract philosophical concepts became tangible, experiential truths that could be felt in the weight of a tea bowl, seen in the irregular glaze of a ceramic cup, and tasted in the slight bitterness of carefully prepared matcha. Central to this philosophy was the concept of wabi-sabi, an aesthetic principle that found beauty not in perfection, but in imperfection, not in permanence, but in transience, not in grandeur, but in humility. In the context of the tea ceremony, wabi-sabi revealed itself in countless subtle ways in the deliberate choice of tea bowls, with irregular shapes or glazes that showed the marks of their making and use, in the preference for implements that bore the patina of age rather than the gleam of newness, in the appreciation of seasonal changes that marked the passage of time rather than the achievement of any permanent state. A tea bowl with a crack that had been mended with gold, the art of kintsugi exemplified this philosophy perfectly. Rather than hiding the damage or discarding the imperfect vessel, the crack was highlighted with precious metal, transforming what might be seen as a flaw into a mark of distinctive beauty. This approach reflected a deeper understanding that perfection was not only impossible, but undesirable. That true beauty emerged from the acceptance and even celebration of life's inherent imperfections. The principle of ichigo, ichi literally, one time. One meeting brought another dimension to the tea ceremony's philosophical foundation. This concept emphasized the absolute uniqueness of each gathering. The understanding that the particular combination of people, whether season, implements, and countless other variables, would never occur again in exactly the same way. This awareness transformed each tea ceremony from a repeated ritual into a singular moment of connection and beauty that deserved complete attention and appreciation under the influence of Ichigo-ichi. Participants approached each tea gathering with a heightened awareness of its temporary nature. The knowledge that this exact moment would never return again imbued every gesture, every conversation, every shared silence with special significance. A guest might spend long minutes simply appreciating the way afternoon light filtered through the shoji screens, understanding that tomorrow's light would be different, that next season's gathering would occur under entirely different conditions. This philosophy of transience extended to the implements themselves. Rather than preserving tea utensils in perfect condition, masters encouraged their use. Understanding that the gradual changes that occurred through handling and service, the development of patina on metal surfaces, the subtle staining of ceramic glazes, the gentle wearing of wooden implements were not signs of deterioration, but evidence of a life fully lived in service to beauty and connection. The tea ceremony also embodied the Zen principle of mindfulness, the practice of being completely present in the current moment rather than allowing the mind to wander to past regrets or future concerns. Every aspect of the ceremony supported this practice. The deliberate slowness of movements that required attention to perform correctly, the focus on subtle sensory experiences that could only be appreciated through complete presence, the ritualized nature of activities that created a framework for sustained attention. This mindfulness extended beyond the formal aspects of the ceremony to encompass a heightened awareness of relationship between host and guest, between humans and the natural world, between individual consciousness and the larger patterns of existence. In the intimate space of the tea house, philosophical abstractions became lived experiences. Theoretical concepts became practical wisdom. The concept of harmony, or wa, permeated every level of the tea ceremony. From the careful coordination of colors and textures in the selection of implements, to the subtle synchronization of breathing among participants. This harmony was not imposed from outside but arose naturally when each element was allowed to express its true nature while remaining in relationship with all other elements. A ceramic tea bowl harmonized with a bamboo whisk, not by becoming bamboo-like, but by fully embodying its own ceramic nature in a way that complemented and enhanced the bamboo's essential qualities. The philosophy of the tea ceremony also embraced the principle of respect, or kai, which manifested as deep appreciation for the inherent worth and dignity of all beings and things. This respect was visible in the careful handling of implements, in the gracious treatment of guests regardless of social rank, in the honoring of natural materials and seasonal changes, and in the recognition that every element contributing to the ceremony, from the charcoal providing heat to the water carrying flavor, deserved gratitude and careful attention. Perhaps most profoundly, the tea ceremony embodied the understanding that spiritual development and aesthetic appreciation were not separate pursuits but different aspects of the same fundamental practice. The cultivation of sensitivity to beauty, the development of skills in graceful movement, the refinement of taste and sensory awareness, all of these seemingly secular activities were understood as forms of spiritual practice that could lead to the same insights and transformations traditionally associated with meditation or prayer. In this way, the philosophy in the cup extended far beyond the tea house walls, offering participants a way of approaching all of life's activities with the same attention, respect, and appreciation for transient beauty that characterized their time in the tea ceremony. The humble act of sharing tea became a complete spiritual practice, a pathway to wisdom that required no special beliefs or complex theology, only the willingness to be fully present to the simple miracle of human connection and shared appreciation for the fleeting beauty of each unrepeatable moment. in the muted light of the tea house. Each implement used in the ceremony revealed itself as more than a mere tool. These objects were repositories of history, philosophy, and craft that had been refined across generations until they achieved a perfection that celebrated imperfection. A utility that transcended mere function to become art in its most essential form. The tea bowl, or chawan, held the place of honor among these implements, not because of any inherent preciousness in its materials, but because of its central role in the ceremony and the profound attention that had been paid to its creation and selection. These bowls were rarely symmetrical in the mathematical sense, their irregularities the result of conscious choice rather than careless craftsmanship. A master potter might spend years developing the particular feel of clay in the hand, the precise thickness of walls that would retain heat without burning fingers, the subtle variations in glaze that would create unique patterns of color and texture. Each tea bowl carried within its curved walls the story of its making, particular clay from which it was formed, drawn perhaps from deposits that had been favored by potters for centuries, the wood that had fired the kiln, chosen for the specific qualities of heat and ash it would provide, the timing of the firing, which could never be exactly replicated, and which gave each piece its unrepeatable character. The glazes showed the tracks of flame and ash, creating patterns that were both random and inevitable. Beautiful, precisely because they could not be controlled or predicted. The bamboo whisk, or chasen, represented perhaps the most refined marriage of natural material and human skill among all the tea implements. Carved from a single piece of bamboo, split into dozens of fine tines through careful knife work that required years to master. Each whisk was a unique creation that would serve for only a limited time, before the delicate tines would begin to break from use. This temporary nature was not seen as a limitation, but as part of the whisk's essential character, like the tea ceremony itself. Its beauty was inseparable from its transience. The creation of a chasen required the craftsperson to understand bamboo as a living material, to work with its grain and structure rather than against them, to find the precise point of flexibility that would allow the tines to whip tea into foam without breaking under the stress of repeated use. The sound each whisk made during the ceremony was unique, determined by the particular characteristics of the bamboo from which it was carved, the thickness and number of its tines, and the way it had been shaped and finished. The water ladle, carved from bamboo and shaped to achieve perfect balance in the hand, exemplified the tea ceremony's principle that the most refined tools were often the simplest. The curve of the handle, the capacity of the bowl, the weight distribution that allowed for graceful, controlled pouring, every aspect had been considered and refined until the ladle became an extension of the tea master's intention, allowing water to be lifted and poured with movements that appeared effortless, but were actually the result of generations of accumulated wisdom about form and function. The iron kettle, or kama, represented perhaps the most substantial and enduring of the tea implements. Its dark surface often showing the marks of countless fires, its shape refined through centuries of use to achieve optimal heating characteristics and the production of those subtle sounds that indicated when water had reached the proper temperature. These kettles were often the work of master metal workers who understood not only the technical requirements of their craft, but also the aesthetic principles that would make each kettle a fitting participant in the tea ceremony, the patina that developed on iron kettles through use was treasured rather than removed, each stain and discoloration telling the story of the fires that had heated it and the water it had warmed. Some kettles were passed down through generations of tea masters, their surfaces becoming historical documents that recorded decades of service in the pursuit of the perfect cup of tea. Tea containers, whether ceramic jars for storing powdered tea or bamboo tubes for holding whisks, were selected and crafted with the same attention to both function and beauty that characterized all tea implements. These containers protected their contents while also serving as objects of contemplation in their own right, their forms and surfaces providing visual and tactile pleasures that enhanced every aspect of the tea ceremony. The silk cloths used for cleaning implements during the ceremony were often treasured possessions, Their weave and color, chosen to harmonize with the season and the particular character of each gathering. These cloths, soft from use and handling, became almost alive in the hands of the tea master. Their movements across the surfaces of bowls and ladles, creating another layer of the ceremony's visual choreography. Even the charcoal used to heat. The water was selected and prepared with extraordinary care. Different woods produced charcoal with different burning characteristics. Some provided steady, even heat, while others created the particular sounds that tea masters prized as accompaniment to the ceremony. The arrangement of charcoal pieces in the fire became its own art form, with patterns that affected not only heat distribution but also the aesthetic quality of the fire, seen through the opening of the hearth. The beauty of these objects lay not in their costliness or rarity, though some were indeed precious, but in their complete suitability to their purpose and their ability to enhance rather than distract from the essential activities of the tea ceremony. A simple bamboo scoop, worn smooth by handling, might be treasured above objects of much greater monetary value because of the way it felt in the hand, the precision with which it could measure tea powder, and the particular beauty of its grain and patina. Each implement was understood to have its own character and preferences, requiring different handling, different care, different appreciation. A ceramic tea bowl might need to be warmed before use, its particular glaze requiring specific temperature conditions to show its best qualities. A bamboo whisk might perform differently in dry weather than in humid conditions, requiring the tea master to adjust technique accordingly. This intimate relationship between craftsperson, tool, and user created a continuity that extended far beyond the duration of any single tea ceremony. The potter, who shaped a bowl decades earlier, remained present in every use of that bowl. The bamboo that grew in mountain groves continued to serve beauty even after being transformed into whisks and scoops. The fire that forged an iron kettle lived on in every flame that heated beneath it. In this way, the objects of the tea ceremony became bridges connecting past and present, nature and human intention, craft and spirit, creating a material foundation for experiences that transcended the merely material, proving that the humblest tools, treated with proper attention and respect, could become gateways to profound understanding and lasting beauty. As evening shadows deepened around the tea house and candle flames began to dance in the still air, Takeshi, a samurai whose scarred hands spoke of decades in service to his lord, found himself caught in a moment of profound stillness that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of ordinary time. The candle before him flickered in response to his breathing, its golden light playing across the weathered surface of the tea bowl he held, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted like memories across the landscape of his consciousness. In this gentle illumination, the harsh lines that battle and responsibility had etched into his face seemed to soften, revealing traces of the young man who had first taken up the sword with such certainty about honor, duty, and the clear divisions between right and wrong. 43 years of life had taught him that certainty was a luxury of youth, that the black and white distinctions that had once seemed so clear had gradually revealed themselves to be composed of countless shades of gray, each requiring careful consideration and often painful choice. The tea house offered him sanctuary not from these complexities, but space to hold them gently, to examine them without the pressure of immediate decision or action. The warmth from the small brazier reminded him of countless nights around military campfires. But here the fire served beauty rather than mere survival. Its purpose to heat water for tea rather than to cook rations or provide warmth against the cold of military campaigns. This shift in the fire's purpose seemed to mirror something deeper in his own life. The same hands that had wielded weapons with deadly precision now held a ceramic bowl with equal skill but entirely different intention. In the dancing candlelight, memories moved through his awareness like clouds across the moon, battles fought with comrades who had since fallen, moments of violence that had seemed necessary at the time but which now felt heavy with their irreversible consequences. Decisions made in haste that had shaped the course of not only his own life, but the lives of countless others. The tea house offered no escape from these memories, but it provided a context in which they could be held with compassion rather than judgment, examined with wisdom rather than mere regret, the other guests seated around the small fire seemed to exist in their own pools of reflection, each candlelit face revealing its own private communion with the complexities of human existence. The elderly merchant across from him bore the quiet dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating the subtle negotiations of commerce, finding honor in fair dealing and beauty in the careful balance of giving and receiving. The young monk to his left carried the particular intensity of someone newly dedicated to spiritual practice. His attention focused inward with the fierce concentration that Keshi recognized from his own early years of sword training. Between them, conversation was unnecessary, yet communication continued through the subtle language of shared presence. When the merchant adjusted his position slightly to better face the fire, when the monk's breathing deepened as he settled more fully into meditation, when Takeshi himself shifted the angle at which he held his tea bowl to catch the light more perfectly, all of these small movements created a kind of dialogue that spoke to the fundamental human need for connection without requiring the complexity of words. The tea master, moving with the unhurried precision that Takeshi had come to associate with true mastery in any discipline, tended the fire and prepared additional servings of tea with movements that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. Watching these deliberate, graceful actions, Takeshi was reminded of his own sword practice, the way that years of repetition had gradually transformed his conscious effort into unconscious competence, allowing complex techniques to flow from a place deeper than thought. But where his martial training had prepared him to respond to aggression with controlled violence, his tea house training was teaching him to respond to life's challenges with controlled stillness, to meet difficulty not with opposition but with acceptance, to find strength not in resistance but in flexibility. The paradox that had initially troubled him, how a warrior could cultivate peace without losing his warrior nature, was beginning to resolve itself in unexpected ways. In the gentle light, he could see his reflection in the dark surface of his tea, his image wavering and shifting with each small movement of the liquid. This unstable reflection seemed to capture something essential about identity itself, not fixed and permanent as he had once believed, but fluid and responsive, shaped by circumstances while maintaining some essential core that remained recognizable across all transformations. The night sounds beyond the paper walls, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through bamboo, the soft settling sounds of the building itself created a backdrop that seemed to place his individual concerns within a larger context of natural rhythms and cycles. His personal history, with all its triumphs and failures, was part of a vast tapestry of human experience that extended far beyond his individual lifetime, connecting him to all those who had struggled with similar questions of purpose, meaning, and moral complexity. As the evening progressed and the candle burned lower, Takeshi found himself entering a state of awareness that was both deeply personal and somehow universal. The particular details of his own life, the specific battles he had fought, the particular relationships he had formed, the individual choices he had made remained present but seemed less burdensome, held within a larger understanding that accepted human limitation. While still honoring human aspiration, the candlelight continued its gentle dance, casting ever-changing patterns on the walls around them, creating a visual meditation that seemed to embody the teaching that all phenomena are temporary, that beauty lies not in permanence but in the graceful acceptance of change. In this understanding, even his own mortality became not a source of anxiety, but a reminder to appreciate fully each moment of awareness, each opportunity for connection, each chance to contribute to the continuing flow of beauty and meaning that connects all beings across time. Through the translucent shoji screens of the tea house, the eternal dance of the seasons revealed itself not as a distant spectacle to be observed, but as an intimate partner in the ceremony. Each change in weather and light transforming the interior space and the quality of human connection it sheltered. In spring, when the mountain snow began its retreat and the first plum blossoms appeared like scattered prayers against the bare branches, the tea house seemed to awaken from winter's deep sleep with renewed possibility. The light filtering through the paper walls carried a different quality than winter's stark clarity. Softer, warmer. Touched with the gentle haze that spoke of growing things and rising moisture from thawing earth, the sounds of spring transformed the tea ceremony's acoustic landscape, where winter had provided the profound silence of snow-muffled landscapes. Spring brought the tentative songs of returning birds, the drip and trickle of melting snow from the eaves, and the subtle sounds of new growth, the almost inaudible whisper of unfurling leaves, the gentle crack of ice breaking up in streams, the soft murmur of earth beginning to breathe again after winter's long pause. Tea masters would adjust their selection of implements to harmonize with spring's arrival. Tea bowls with glazes that suggested new grass or cherry blossoms would replace the deeper, more subdued colors of winter ceramics. The quality of light streaming through the shoji screens would influence the choice of tea containers, with potters having created pieces specifically to show their best qualities in spring's particular illumination. The transition from spring to summer brought its own transformations to the tea house experience. As temperatures rose and humidity increased, the paper walls seemed to breathe more deeply, expanding and contracting with the daily cycles of heat and moisture. The sounds of summer filtered through these responsive surfaces, the rhythmic drone of cicadas that marked hot afternoons, the distant sound of children's voices carrying across rice fields, the evening chorus of frogs that rose from irrigation channels and ponds. Summer tea ceremonies often began later in the day, when the heat had passed its peak and the slanting light created different patterns of illumination within the tea house. The quality of shadows changed, becoming softer and more diffuse, while the warmth that radiated from the tatami mats created an atmosphere of drowsy contentment that influenced the pace and tone of conversation. The iron kettle, heated over charcoal fires, served a different purpose in summer than in winter. Where cold season gatherings welcomed the additional warmth, summer ceremonies required careful attention to ventilation and the positioning of guests to avoid unnecessary heat. Tea masters developed techniques for managing temperature that became part of their aesthetic practice, the strategic opening and closing of shoji screens, the timing of fire tending to coincide with the coolest parts of the ceremony, the selection of lighter ceramics that would not retain heat excessively. Autumn's arrival brought, perhaps, the most dramatic transformation to the tea house atmosphere. As leaves began their spectacular display of color before falling, the light filtering through the paper walls took on the golden quality that seemed to transform everything it touched. The sounds of autumn, the rustle of falling leaves against the roof, the distant calls of birds beginning their southward journeys, the crisp quality that comes to air as humidity. Drops created a bittersweet backdrop to ceremonies that carried an undertone of gentle melancholy, the Japanese aesthetic. The concept of mono no aware, the pathos of things, the gentle sadness that comes from recognizing the transient nature of beauty found its perfect expression in autumn tea ceremonies. The very implements seem to glow more richly in autumn light, their imperfections and signs of age becoming more beautiful rather than less, as if the season's reminder of mortality enhanced rather than diminished. Their capacity to move the human heart, tea masters would select autumn-appropriate implements with particular care. Bowls with glazes that echoed the colors of changing leaves, containers that suggested the golden brown of ripening rice, ladles with grain patterns that harmonized with the season's emphasis on harvest and preparation for winter's approach. Even the choice of charcoal became seasonally specific, with different woods selected to produce the particular qualities of heat and sound that complemented autumn's character. Winter's return brought the tea house full circle, but never to exactly the same place. As the accumulated experience of the passing year had subtly changed both the space and those who gathered within it, the paper walls that had breathed with summer's humidity and glowed with autumn's golden light now seemed to contract slightly in the dry cold, their surfaces becoming more taut and responsive to the subtlest changes in interior temperature and humidity. The sounds of winter, the profound silence of falling snow, the sharp crack of expanding and contracting wood in extreme cold, the distant sound of wind through bare branches created a sense of intimacy and enclosure that made the tea house feel like a warm refuge suspended in a crystalline world. The light that filtered through snow-covered paper walls was pure and clean, creating interior illumination that seemed to clarify rather than merely reveal, making every detail of the ceremony visible with unusual sharpness and precision. Winter tea ceremonies often extended longer than those of other seasons. The enclosed feeling in early darkness, encouraging participants to linger in the warmth and light of the shared space. The contrast between the harsh conditions outside and the gentle atmosphere within created a heightened appreciation for simple comforts. The warmth of the tea bowl in cold hands. The way candlelight seemed more precious when daylight faded early. The particular pleasure of human companionship when the natural world seemed to encourage solitude. Each season's passage left its mark on the tea house and its furnishings. Paper walls showed the accumulated stains and discolorations of many weather cycles, their imperfections becoming part of their beauty. Wooden elements developed patina and character through exposure to seasonal humidity changes. Even the tatami mats carried subtle traces of the seasons, the lingering scent of summer rains, the dryness of winter air, the fresh quality that came with spring's renewal. In this way, the tea house became not just a shelter from the seasons, but a collaborator with them. Its interior space shaped and colored by the eternal cycle of change that governs all natural phenomena. Participants in tea ceremonies learned to appreciate not just the ceremony itself, but their place within the larger rhythms of nature, finding in the seasonal transformations of their small sanctuary a reflection of the changes that mark their own lives and the lives of all beings, sharing the brief gift of awareness in a world of constant, beautiful transformation. In the intimate confines of the tea house, where paper walls created a boundary between the outer world and inner sanctuary, a sophisticated form of communication evolved that relied not on the usual tools of human interaction, words, gestures, or facial expressions, but on subtler channels that spoke directly from heart to heart through the medium of shared silence and collective presence. This unspoken language began even before guests entered the tea house proper. In the careful choreography of arrival that had been refined over generations to minimize disruption, while maximizing the sense of gradual transition from ordinary consciousness to the heightened awareness that the tea ceremony required, guests would time their approach to avoid arriving simultaneously, allowing each person the private moment of mental preparation that crossing the threshold demanded, while also ensuring that no one would feel the social pressure of making conversation during those first few minutes of adjustment to the tea house atmosphere. The removal of footwear, performed in the small entrance area, became a form of communication in itself. The care with which shoes were arranged, the attention paid to ensuring that each pair was positioned to facilitate easy departure without disrupting other guests. The quiet efficiency with which this practical necessity was accomplished. All of these details conveyed respect for the space and consideration for fellow participants, without requiring any verbal acknowledgement. Once inside, the selection of seating positions followed protocols that balanced social hierarchy with practical considerations. But these arrangements were negotiated through subtle cues rather than explicit direction. A slight hesitation before moving toward a particular position, a gentle gesture indicating preference for another guest to choose first, a graceful acceptance of whatever position remained after others had settled. These micro-communications created a harmony of placement that felt natural, despite being the result of complex social calculation. The quality of attention that guests brought to the tea master's preparations became another channel of communication. The depth of focus with which participants followed each movement, the synchronization of their breathing with the rhythm of the ceremony, the way their collective attention seemed to create a field of concentrated awareness that supported rather than pressured the tea master's performance. All of this constituted a form of applause more meaningful than any verbal appreciation could provide. Contact in the tea house followed different rules than in ordinary social situations. Rather than the direct gaze that Western cultures often interpret as honesty or confidence, Tea house etiquette encouraged a more oblique attention that allowed participants to be fully present with each other without the intensity that direct eye contact could create in such an intimate setting. This sideways attention, focusing on hands, implements, or the middle distance, created a paradoxical effect: greater intimacy through apparent distance, deeper connection through the absence of direct confrontation. The handling of tea bowls became a language rich with meaning and emotion. The way a guest received a bowl, with what degree of reverence, with what attention to its particular characteristics, with what care for its safe passage from tea master to participant, communicated appreciation more eloquently than words could express. The angle at which the bowl was held, the time taken to appreciate its weight and texture before drinking, the position in which it was placed when returned, each of these choices carried meaning that other participants could read and appreciate. Even the timing of movements became communicative. A guest who moved slightly more slowly than necessary during the ceremony's formal phases was expressing deep appreciation for the teeth experience and reluctance to see it end. Conversely, someone whose movements were precisely timed to the ceremony's natural rhythm was showing mastery of the form and respect for its traditional pacing. These temporal communications were so subtle, they might be missed entirely by casual observers. But regular participants in tea ceremonies could read them as clearly as written text. The quality of silence itself became a form of expression. There was the attentive silence of deep listening, the contemplative silence of inner reflection, the appreciative silence of aesthetic absorption, and the comfortable silence of people who felt no need to fill empty space with unnecessary words. Each type of silence had its own texture and presence, contributing to the overall atmosphere in ways that participants could sense without necessarily being able to articulate. Breathing patterns created another layer of unspoken communication. As the ceremony progressed and participants settled into its rhythm, their breathing would naturally synchronize, creating a subtle collective rhythm that connected everyone present at the most fundamental level. This shared breathing became particularly noticeable during the ceremony's quieter moments, when the sound of the kettle had died down and no active preparations were taking place, allowing the gentle sound of collective respiration to become audible and somehow deeply reassuring. The way guests positioned their hands while seated, resting on thighs, folded in lap, or placed at sides conveyed different states of attention and receptivity. These hand positions, traditional elements of meditation posture, were read unconsciously by other participants as indicators of each person's level of engagement and openness to the shared experience. A subtle shift in hand position could signal a transition from active attention to deeper contemplation, or from private reflection to renewed engagement with the group dynamic. Even the angle of spines and the position of shoulders spoke volumes about each participant's internal state. The gradual relaxation that typically occurred as ceremonies progressed could be observed in the softening of postures, the settling of shoulders, the slight forward inclination that indicated deepening attention. These physical changes created a visible map of the ceremony's psychological effects, allowing participants to share in each other's journey towards stillness without needing to verbalize their experiences. The concluding phases of the ceremony brought their own vocabulary of unspoken communication. The reluctance to break the spell of shared silence, expressed through the gradual nature of departure preparations, communicated the value that participants placed on their time together, the care with which final movements were executed, the attention paid to leaving the space undisturbed for future gatherings. The quality of final bows, all of these elements constituted a collective thank you that honored not only the tea master, but the entire experience, Towel, who had contributed to its success. In this way, the tea house became a laboratory for human communication that transcended the limitations of language, proving that the deepest forms of connection often occur not through words, but through the shared creation of beauty, the collective appreciation of transient moments, and the mutual recognition of each person's fundamental need for understanding, acceptance, and gentle companionship on the mysterious journey of conscious existence. As the final notes of the tea ceremony dissolved into the gathering darkness, time itself seemed to soften around the edges, releasing its usual grip on consciousness and allowing the natural rhythms of rest and renewal to assert their ancient claim over human awareness. The transition from the structured beauty of the ceremony to the unstructured peace of evening began with the tea master's methodical cleaning and storing of implements. Each action performed with the same deliberate grace that had characterized their use. But now these movements carried a different quality, not the anticipatory energy of preparation, but the satisfied completion that comes when something has been done well and completely. Guests remained seated as this closing ritual unfolded, their presence providing silent witness to the care with which each bowl was cleaned. Each utensil returned to its proper place, each element of the ceremony given proper conclusion. The sound of water being poured for cleaning, the soft whisper of silk cloth against ceramic surfaces, the gentle placement of implements. In their storage positions, these sounds created a lullaby of completion that seemed to ease participants deeper into the relaxed state that the ceremony had cultivated, one by one. As the tea master's closing activities neared their end, guests began the gradual process of departure. But even this leaving was performed with the same unhurried attention that had characterized the entire gathering. Rising from seiza posture after sitting motionless for extended periods required patience and care, the temporary stiffness in legs and back becoming part of the transition back to ordinary movement in ordinary time. The first guest to depart moved with special deliberation, understanding that their leaving would signal the beginning of the end for all participants. The bow offered to the tea master and to fellow guests, the careful navigation of the small space without disturbing those who remained, the quiet efficiency of retrieving footwear and returning to the outer world. All of these actions were performed as extensions of the ceremony itself, maintaining its quality of mindful attention even as its formal structure dissolved. As each successive guest departed, the tea house grew quieter and emptier, but not in a way that suggested loss or incompletion. Instead, the gradual reduction in human presence seemed to allow the space itself to exhale, to settle back into its fundamental nature as a sanctuary that could hold peace whether occupied by many, few, or none at all. The tea master, now alone or nearly alone, moved through the final phases of closing the tea house with movements that carried the weight of countless similar evenings. The banking of the fire so that coals would provide gentle warmth without active flame. The adjustment of shoji screens to optimize the space for rest. The positioning of remaining implements so that they could dry properly. Overnight, each of these actions was both practical necessity and ceremonial conclusion. Outside, the paper walls of the tea house glowed softly with the light of remaining candles and the dying fire, creating a beacon of warmth and peace in the settling darkness. This gentle illumination spoke of human presence and care, even as the space emptied of its human occupants, suggesting that the peace cultivated within these walls had a life of its own that could persist beyond any particular gathering. The sounds of evening began to assert themselves more prominently as the human sounds of the ceremony faded. Night birds called from the surrounding trees, their voices carrying across the distance with the particular clarity that comes with cooler air in the absence of daytime activity. The wind, if present, moved through bamboo groves and over tiled roofs with sounds that seemed to echo the gentle rustling that silk kimonos had made against tatami mats during the ceremony. Inside the tea house, the tea master extinguished candles one by one, each flame's departure marked by a small wisp of smoke that rose into the still air before dispersing. The scent of extinguished candles, a mixture of heated wax and the particular smell of flame returning to darkness, added another layer to the atmosphere of gentle conclusion that now filled the space as the last light was put out and the tea master prepared for their own departure. The tea house settled into the deep quiet that would carry it through the night hours. The building itself seemed to relax, its wooden frame releasing the subtle tensions that human occupation had created, its paper walls cooling slightly as the last body heat dissipated, its tatami mats gradually returning to their natural temperature and humidity levels. the tea master's final departure, marked by the soft sound of the door sliding closed and the gentle scrape of wood against wood as it was secured, left the tea house to its solitary communion with the night. But this solitude was not empty or lonely, it was full of the resonance that remains when something beautiful has been completed. When human beings have gathered to create meaning and connection, and when that creation has been allowed to conclude naturally, rather than being forced or hurried to an artificial end, in the hours that followed, as the night deepened and the human world settled into sleep, the tea house continued its quiet existence as a sanctuary of peace. The sounds that penetrated its walls were the sounds of a world at rest, the distant hoot of owls, the rustle of small creatures moving through garden spaces, the occasional settling sound from cooling wood and paper, the gentle whisper of air moving through spaces designed to breathe with the natural world. This transition from active ceremony to passive rest mirrored the larger rhythm of days and seasons, of waking and sleeping, of gathering and solitude that governs all life. The tea house, having served its purpose as a container for human connection and shared beauty, now served its equally important purpose as a guardian of peace, holding space for the rest and renewal that would prepare those who had gathered within it for future opportunities to create meaning together as the last participants made their way home through the darkness, carrying within themselves the peace and stillness they had cultivated together. They moved toward their own rest with minds and hearts prepared for the deep sleep that would integrate their experience and restore their capacity for further awakening. The tea ceremony's gift extended beyond its temporal boundaries, its influence continuing in the quality of sleep it made possible, the dreams it would inspire, and the subtle transformation it had worked in all who had participated in its ancient magic of shared silence and collective appreciation for life's most essential beauties in the centuries that followed. Those medieval evenings when samurai first discovered sanctuary in humble tea houses. The ripples of their quiet revolution continued to spread through Japanese culture like circles expanding across still water, touching aspects of life that seemed far removed from the simple act of sharing tea, yet were fundamentally transformed by the principles first cultivated in those small, paper-walled sanctuaries. The influence of the tea house extended first into the realm of architecture, where the aesthetic principles developed for these tiny ceremonial spaces began to shape the design of homes, temples, and even palaces. The concept of beauty found in simplicity, of elegance achieved through restraint rather than ornamentation, gradually became fundamental to Japanese architectural philosophy. Buildings began to incorporate the tea house principles of harmony with natural surroundings, the careful control of light through translucent screens, and the creation of interior spaces that encouraged contemplation rather than display. Garden design evolved under the tea house influence, moving away from grand formal arrangements toward more subtle compositions that emphasized natural beauty enhanced rather than dominated by human intervention. The winding paths that led to tea houses became models for garden circulation throughout Japan. With their emphasis on gradual revelation of beauty, the importance of transition zones between different types of space, and the use of simple element stones, water, plants to create complex emotional and aesthetic experiences. The tea ceremonies. Emphasis on seasonal awareness spread into other aspects of Japanese culture, influencing everything from cuisine to poetry to the organization of social gatherings. The principle that beauty was enhanced rather than diminished by recognition of its temporary nature became central to Japanese aesthetic philosophy, creating a cultural appreciation for cherry blossoms precisely because they fell so quickly, for the sound of temple bells precisely because they faded into silence, for the company of friends precisely because such gatherings could never be repeated exactly. In the visual arts, the tea house aesthetic influence painting, calligraphy, and ceramics in profound ways. The preference for understated beauty over obvious display, for rough textures that showed the hand of their maker over smooth perfection that concealed the process of creation, for asymmetrical compositions that left space for the viewer's imagination. All of these principles, first developed in the context of selecting and appreciating tea implements, became central to Japanese artistic production. The social implications of tea house culture proved equally far-reaching. The temporary suspension of social hierarchy that occurred within the tea house walls gradually influenced broader concepts of appropriate behavior and interpersonal relationships. While Japan remained a highly stratified society, the tea ceremony provided a model for interactions based on mutual respect and appreciation for individual dignity that transcended social position, creating subtle but persistent pressure for more humane treatment of all people, regardless of their place in the social order. The business culture of Japan absorbed many tea house principles, particularly the emphasis on attention to detail, the importance of proper form and procedure, and the understanding that relationships were as important as transactions. The tea ceremonies lessened that the most important business was often conducted in silence. Through careful observation and intuitive understanding rather than explicit negotiation, became embedded in Japanese approaches to commerce and diplomacy. Educational philosophy in Japan was similarly influenced by tea house culture. The tea ceremony's demonstration that learning was best accomplished through patient observation, careful imitation, and gradual refinement rather than through aggressive competition or hurried advancement, became a model for teaching and learning in other disciplines. The concept of the student-teacher relationship as one of mutual respect and shared dedication to perfection, rather than simple transmission of information from superior to subordinate, spread from tea houses into schools, martial arts training, and artistic instruction. Even the development of Japanese concepts of hospitality bore the mark of tea house influence. The principle that the host's highest honor came from creating conditions in which guests could be most fully themselves, rather than from impressing them with displays of wealth or power, became central to Japanese approaches to entertaining and social gathering. The tea ceremony's lesson that the most memorable experiences often came from attention to small details rather than grand gestures influenced everything from the presentation of meals to the design of inns and restaurants. The spiritual dimensions of tea house culture extended beyond the boundaries of any particular religious tradition, contributing to a uniquely Japanese synthesis of Buddhist Shinto and Confucian principles that emphasize the possibility of finding enlightenment through careful attention to everyday activities. The tea ceremony's demonstration that the sacred could be accessed through secular activities, that washing dishes or arranging flowers or preparing food could become forms of meditation influenced the development of other ways or due practices, from flower arrangement to martial arts to calligraphy. Literature and poetry absorbed tea house influences through their emphasis on brevity, suggestion rather than explicit statement, and the finding of profound meaning in simple observations. The haiku form, with its ability to capture vast experiences in just a few carefully chosen words, reflected the tea ceremony's lesson that less could indeed be more, that restraint and precision could achieve effects that elaborate exposition could not match. The tea house tradition also contributed to Japanese concepts of time and scheduling, introducing the radical idea that some activities were valuable precisely because they could not be hurried, that efficiency was not always the highest virtue, and that periods of apparent inactivity might actually be the most productive times for reflection, relationship building, and creative inspiration as Japan encountered the modern world and its demands for rapid change and international competitiveness. The tea house tradition provided a source of cultural continuity and stability. The principles developed in those medieval tea houses, attention to quality over quantity, respect for tradition balanced with openness to innovation, the importance of creating spaces for human connection in an increasingly impersonal world proved to be not obstacles to modernization, but essential elements in maintaining cultural identity while adapting to new circumstances. Today, the legacy of those quiet tea house gatherings continues to influence Japanese culture in ways both obvious and subtle. From the design of contemporary architecture that still emphasizes harmony with natural surroundings, to business practices that prioritize long-term relationships over short-term profits, to an aesthetic sensibility that finds beauty in simplicity and meaning in the careful attention to life's most ordinary moments. The tea houses themselves, many of them now centuries old, continue to serve their original purpose as sanctuaries of peace and contemplation, proving that some human innovations are so fundamental to our deepest needs that they transcend the particular historical circumstances of their creation, offering each new generation the same opportunity for stillness, connection, and the discovery of beauty in the most humble and temporary aspects of existence. As our journey through the quiet tea houses of medieval Japan draws to its gentle close, we find ourselves suspended between two worlds: the bustling urgency of our contemporary lives and the profound stillness that once offered refuge to warriors whose hearts sought peace amidst the uncertainties of duty and honor. In the gathering darkness of this moment, imagine one final tea house, its paper walls glowing softly with the light of a single candle that has burned steadily throughout our long exploration together. This last flame, no different from countless others that have illuminated centuries of tea ceremonies, dances with the same patient rhythm that marked the breathing of all those samurai who discovered that true strength sometimes meant simply knowing when to set down one's sword and accept the gift of perfect stillness. Candle's light grows smaller now, its wax pool deepening, its flame settling into the steady burn that precedes the peaceful transition from illumination to darkness. In its diminishing glow, the tea implements that have served so faithfully, the bamboo whisk worn smooth by countless ceremonies, the ceramic bowls that have held both tea and tears, the iron kettle that has sung its water songs through generations of gatherings, seem to exhale their own satisfaction at duties completed, their own readiness for the rest that follows meaningful service. The shadows in our imaginary tea house grow longer and softer, reaching across tatami mats like gentle fingers that ease the transition from wakefulness toward sleep. These shadows carry within them the accumulated peace of all those evening gatherings when conversation gradually gave way to contemplative silence, when the urgent concerns of daily life dissolved into the larger rhythms of breath and heartbeat, when individual consciousness settled into the vast quiet that connects all beings across time and space. Outside the paper walls, the night sounds of medieval Japan continue their eternal symphony, the distant call of an owl maintaining its patient vigil, the whisper of wind through bamboo groves that bend without breaking, the soft settling sounds of a world that knows how to rest without losing its essential aliveness. These sounds, unchanged across centuries, offer the same comfort to our modern ears that they provided to samurai seeking respite from the Usameta demands of honor and duty. The tea master, in our final scene, moves with the unhurried precision that comes only from complete mastery, extinguishing the smaller candles one by one while leaving the central flame to burn a few moments longer. Each small extinction releases a wisp of smoke that carries with it the prayers and meditations of countless tea ceremonies, the hopes and fears of generations who found in these humble spaces a doorway to something larger than their individual lives. As the last implements are cleaned and stored, as the fire settles into glowing coals that will warm the tea house through the night hours, as the final preparations for rest are completed with the same attention that marked every aspect of the ceremony, we too can feel our own readiness for the sleep that restores and renews, that carries us across the bridge between consciousness and dreams. The single remaining candle flame grows smaller still, its light concentrating into an ever-diminishing point of warmth and illumination that seems to draw all of our attention, all of our remaining wakefulness, into its gentle dance, like the breath of a meditation master settling into deeper and deeper stillness. The flame grows quieter, more concentrated, more perfectly itself as it approaches the moment of transition. In this flame, we can see the reflection of all the peace we have encountered on our journey, the stillness that samurai found when they removed their armor and entered spaces designed for contemplation rather than conflict, the harmony that emerged when human beings gathered with no purpose except to share beauty and honor the temporary nature of all existence. The profound rest that became possible when the mind finally released its grip on the endless tasks and concerns that usually fill every moment of conscious life. The shadows reach further now, embracing more of the tea house in their gentle darkness, creating the perfect conditions for the transition from awareness to sleep, from the efforts of consciousness to the healing, restoration that comes only when we allow ourselves to be held by forces larger and more nurturing than our individual. Well, as the candle flame settles into its final moments, burning with the perfect steadiness that comes just before peaceful extinction, we too can settle into the approaching darkness with the same trust that generations of tea ceremony participants learned to place in the natural rhythms of gathering and departure, illumination and rest, presence and absence. The flame grows smaller, smaller still, its light concentrating into a single point of golden warmth that seems to contain within itself all the peace and beauty we have encountered in our exploration of these quiet sanctuaries. And then, with a gentleness that mirrors the approach of sleep itself, the flame settles into stillness, releases its light to the darkness, and allows the tea house to rest in the same profound quiet that has embraced all beings across all time. The same darkness that offers restoration to warriors and poets alike, the same peaceful silence that now invites you to set down the efforts of the day and drift into the healing depths of sleep, carrying with you the timeless lesson that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through struggle but through the simple, profound act of allowing yourself to rest. In the gentle darkness that follows, may you find the same peace that once blessed the hearts of samurai warriors, the same rest that restored their spirits for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, in the same deep knowing that in stillness, in silence, in the humble sharing of simple beauty, lies a strength more enduring than any sword, a refuge more secure than any fortress, and a wisdom more valuable than any victory won through force of arms. Asterisk.